Hey, that's all right. Something happened. Glad someone's in control. Anyway, do you want me just to hit it from the top then, Claire?
Go for
Right.
it.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just minimize you guys off the screen, even though I'd love to see your lovely little faces. So if I just say something like really quick, Claire, thank you first of all for inviting me. I'm going to talk to you about repossessions. And I call this repossession rescue, but what it's really about is how do we tackle repossessions in this whole post-COVID economy? Because no one's talking about them. No one's talking about repossessions. We're all talking about properties are going through the roof, everything's selling. There's a dearth of deals out there because it's a seller's market and buyers are finding it difficult to get their hands on anything. And I will give you a wee potted history of me as I go, but I'll do it as we do the presentation. But what I want you to consider tonight is that in the background of all of this, there are lots of people emerging from the bounce back loan schemes, the furlough schemes, the mortgage payment holidays, and everything else that's gone, with the financial package to keep everything together. There are lots of people emerging from this, businesses as well as individuals, who simply aren't going to recover from, we're still in the death knell for this. And again, it's just I want to present you with this visual about a tsunami. Now, I'm not a doom monger. I'm the most positive, upbeat person, I think, and Claire will attest to this because I couldn't stop yammering on when we were talking. But in a genuine tsunami situation, the tide goes out. Everybody thinks, what the hell's going on? Actually, it looks like there's more beach. So let's all go strolling on the beach. There's plenty of space. It looks okay. It looks calm. The water's a way out. Everything looks grand. And then they realize that the tide is starting to come in. It starts to feel a bit uncomfortable. But nobody does anything. They all hang around doing what they're doing. And it is not the first wave of a tsunami that wipes people out, because the first wave that comes back in a tsunami is just the precursor of what's about to come down the line. And I'm not an economist, I am just someone who's lived through enough boom and bust bloody cycles to see them happen several times over. And what tends to happen is, as I say, people come out, they start spending their money, they start, feeling good about stuff again. And it's the second or third wave that actually takes people out, because they're still out on the sand thinking things are okay. And if you keep that image in your mind, there is a proportion of folk out there now watching the news, hearing that everything's selling, hearing that the economy's recovering, hearing that people are out spending their money again. And for them, that's not what they're experiencing at home. So I wanted to give you that image because I want you to keep this image in your head as you go through. And I want to share this little bit of information right here. And I don't know why this little bar doesn't go down out my road, because it's driving me blooming nuts. But the Social Market Foundation did an analysis this year, 2021, did an analysis of wealth and assets, looking from 2016 to 2018, so obviously before COVID. And it's analysed, the households, if you like, that are vulnerable to repossession. And from 2016 to 2018, bearing in mind we're also now going through the post-COVID economy, we've reached a stage that 770,000 people, and it will be more now, that are vulnerable to repossession. What that means is that a percentage of people out there have less than a couple of months from total financial meltdown. And if you look just at this, if you look at this kind of, the overall figure, but look at even in the richest 25%, there's 150,000, probably over 200,000 now, of the richest folk in the country, as well as the poorest. So again, please don't think it's not happening, because for some people the financial packages have come too late for them anyway. They were already in distress going into COVID, and COVID has just put another nail in the coffin. And if we want to liken that to the size of the problem, it's effectively the size of Nottinghamshire and bigger. Because what's not included in these figures are the 400,000 plus mortgage prisoners in the UK. And by mortgage prisoners, what I mean is the guys that in the next 5 years, their interest-only mortgages that they took out 25 years ago are coming to an end. and if in the next 5 years we have a dip, they may actually not have enough to pay off those mortgages, or certainly they won't have the same amount of money that they were hoping that would pay off those mortgages. And any endowment policies, whatever that they have that are due to mature, may not be enough to take them out of the game. So if you add that 400,000 to this, as you can see, is well over 1 million people, not necessarily facing repossession with the mortgage prisoners, because they will probably try to negotiate something with lenders, but it's certainly in terms of people facing financial difficulty, businesses, individual business owners, as well as people employed. I think if you think the size of Nottingham, that is a big, Nottinghamshire, that's a big, big group of folk. So the message I want to give to you tonight is that regardless of where you're thinking you're at as an investor, whether you're doing rent to rent, whether you're doing service accommodation, whether you're doing whatever, because I'm going to talk about some strategies, I want you to approach every single seller as distressed. I hear a lot of, dare I say it, I hear a lot of people who train in property. I hear a lot of investors talk about people facing repossession as motivated sellers. In the reality, what we're often talking about is people who are so financially distressed that they have almost no other option than to take what's given to them on the table. And if I weave part of my story into that, my son is 31. He's just turned 31. And when he was 18 months old, my relationship fell apart. We had ridiculous interest rates at that point. I think we had 14% interest rate at that point. But to the rest of the world, I looked like I had my whole life together. I was a senior nurse in the NHS. I had a very good job, car on the driveway. My husband was also a senior manager in the NHS. To all intents and purposes, everything in the garden was rosy, and we looked like the perfect life. But in behind closed doors, the relationship was crumbling. The finances were incredibly stressed, and I wasn't involved in property at that point. And I wished, if I could have changed anything about my life, I wish that I knew then what I now know in terms of how I could have helped myself out of that situation. Because there were days that I simply used to sit at home and watch cars going by outside, thinking, who's that? Who is this person outside? Maybe they're coming to knock on the door to talk to me about my finances. It could be the credit card company, it could have been the bank, and I was frightened to death to go out. And so I know from personal experience how it feels to be on the surface of it looking like you got all your shit together, but in behind financially just absolutely crumbling to bits. And there are millions of people out there, even at these figures, there are millions of people out there that are experiencing that right now. So motivated sellers, I think we need to change that phraseology around them, and we need to remember that anybody who describes themselves as financially distressed in any way, even if they're a landlord with a portfolio, are likely to be incredibly stressed, vulnerable, and psychologically, and we need to think about that. So, okay, I'm going to do some practical stuff because I'm not here to do a big kind of lecture job. But I'm passionate about this. I'm completely passionate about helping people who are facing eviction and facing repossession, because there are a million things that we as investors, again, with the knowledge and the benefit of 20 years, 30 years, if you like, away from the position I was in then, that we can do. And we can do the right thing. We can still make a profit. We can still feel great about what we do. And I think we can challenge the public perception that all investors are greedy, vultures preying on the vulnerable, because I know that is not the case. So a few things to do if you're dealing with anybody who says they're in financial distress. And again, this would apply equally to someone who said to you they're a landlord with a portfolio. And I have dealt with a lot of portfolios over the years, from 2 or 3 properties to my biggest was 110 properties, right at the height of the financial crisis. So the first thing is check the situation. People who are in financial distress don't often know what the situation really is. They'll give you some vague figures and you may think they're just bullshitting you. But often they genuinely cannot remember the last time they checked. They're afraid to open letters, they're afraid to open envelopes, they're afraid to answer the phone. And nowadays, because we've got mobile phones, you've emails, you've letters, you've got texts coming at you from everywhere. And it can be so overwhelming that you cannot cope with it. So the first thing you've got to do when you're dealing with a situation, if you really want to not just help them, but do the deal, is make sure you get down to what is the situation as it stands like right now. Show me the last letters that you had. show me the last text that you had, show me the last conversation you had. But when you do that, while you're doing that, check they've actually got some advice. We're not here to do regulated advice, but we've got Bryn here, obviously, who's an IFA. We are not in a position where we can give advice like go and remortgage and finance your way out of debt, because for most people, financing their way out of debt is not an option because their credit is rubbish, so they can't finance out. And even the ones who could finance it out is sometimes just adding another nail in the coffin. So check they've got some help, and I'm going to give you some details about where you can make sure they kind of at least have the number. If you do nothing else on your publicity, give people some really useful phone numbers so that you can satisfy yourself you've done at least what you need to do. If they say they have had court paperwork, or they've had legal paperwork, or they've had a debt company, just again, check what they've had. There are certain documents, and I've given you some examples here, but it will depend on the jurisdiction. It will depend on whether it's a commercial loan. It will depend on whether it's a residential mortgage, or if it's a buy-to-let mortgage. The process is slightly different. I haven't got time to go through it all tonight, but check the documents that they've got. You'd obviously do some due diligence on the seller. Are they who they say they are? Are they the person with the debt? Are there other debts that have been added? And if they're going to court, you will have to return a form to the court within 14 days of them saying that they have a court date. Now, a lot of people leave it to the last minute. So again, please don't judge people if they say to you, I've got 2 days, or by the way, it needs to happen tomorrow, because this is what happens. In reality, this is what happens. And I often hear of people, you know, and this has been my experience, they ring me up and they say, Trish, I need to be in court by Friday, and we're on Tuesday, or we're on Wednesday, and they say I'm going tomorrow. Obviously, you've got to have time to run your numbers to see if you can help. But if all that you do is to say, look, I don't know whether I can help, but you need to really trust me to be able to look at the information, then if you can at least, and this is where trust mix comes in. I'm going to talk to Jonathan about trust mix. People want people to trust. And when you're financially vulnerable and facing the situation, you have guilt, you have fear, you have shame, you have the embarrassment of saying, why can't I manage my finances better? But there, for the grace of God, go you, me, and probably lots of others. So you need to just try and get people to focus for that moment in time where you say, I can only help you if we have everything that you know at this moment in time. Okay, so that's the kind of key things. One thing you need to remember is lenders have to follow some rules. Even the lenders that are in non-regulated products, they kind of need to be seen to treat customers fairly, even though it's not necessarily a residential mortgage. So they have to have seen to follow some process. With residential property, there's the mortgage conduct of business rules that they should follow. And as I say, they should be seen to treat customers fairly. They have to consider reasonably any offer that's made to either clear the arrears, or to, you know, if they're planning on selling the property, to give some time for them to look at what the other options are. When they say they have to consider it, that doesn't mean to say they have to agree with it. They don't have to agree with it, but they have to say, you have to show that they've considered it. And if you ever have to go to court, that is one of the things that you say, can you show where you have had an offer positioned in front of you and you've either rejected it, or you've at least said you're still thinking about it. If you are already in some kind of agreement with a lender, and you default on that agreement. So say, for the sake of argument, the person who's got the property says to you, I'm in an agreement with my lender, but they're taking me to court because I've breached it. The lender has to give the customer 15 days notice that they've broken the agreement. They basically have to say, look, you've broken the agreement. We've told you you've broken the agreement. And if they're going to go to court, before they take action to go to court, this is not before they go to court, before they take action to go to court, they need to say, our next stage is court. They need to give you at least 5 days before they actually then go through court action. And again, these are things that you can use if you ever have to query this at court, or you ever have to speak to a lender, or speak to the legal team representing the lender. You can say, have these things been done? And if they haven't been done, you have a chance to slow the process down. And the biggest tip I can give you is, if we're dealing with repossessions, one thing you want to try and buy is a wee bit more time. Your priority isn't necessarily to completely solve the whole situation tonight. It's simply using your skill and your knowledge of the process to slow down any further action, because that gives you a chance to do some amazing things in a short space of time. So as I've just shown you the previous slide, when you want to speak to the lender, even if all you're going to do is check that everything the seller has said to you is the case. So the same thing would be for landlords with portfolios. All you want to do is, when you are speaking to the lender, is get authority to speak to the lender so that you're in a position to check the facts. Because if you've had a document and it's 2 months old, there could be interest added on interest, there could be charges added on charges, and the number that you've now got is already out of date. So we want to get authority to speak to lenders, but it's not to turn everybody into ace negotiators. I mean, obviously that's something that I do with guys. If they ask for my advice, you can have a consult call with me kind of after this if you need. But the first thing you want to do is just get an authority to speak to the lender. And the best way to do that is, if the seller is sitting next to you, you say, make the call to your lender or to the solicitor representing the lender. Say, I've got a family friend here, I've got someone who's helping me sort the finances out, someone who's helping me sort the problem out. Can you just speak to them on my behalf while they're here? And in that case, you are not saying, you're, bloody hell, you're taking action against this person, they're very distressed. You don't antagonize them. You simply say, can you confirm all of these things? And you have a little checklist: the loan, the situation, this process, the stage that process is up to. You ask for copies of everything. You don't make them an offer to pay off the arrears. You don't make them an offer to buy the property at this stage, because the lenders don't care about that. What they care about is, have we checks and balances? Have we done our process? And all you want to know in your first call is everything the seller told me true? Is it up to date? And when you get that, you go and do your due diligence. Seriously, I have a little formula for this. That's all we do at this first call. There are lots of alternatives that a lender can agree with the seller as an alternative to going down the road of actually taking that property back, including, as I say, even buy-to-let properties. The first thing they can do is they can delay any further interest payments. Now, during COVID, of course, we had the kind of ability to ask for a mortgage payment holiday. Those have all ended now. That's not an option anymore. But they may delay some interest payments in certain circumstances, again, providing you can position a reasonable reason why they might want to consider that. One thing they could do is they could extend the mortgage term. So they could say, well, we'll add interest payments that were missed. So if there's arrears, we can add that to the mortgage term, and that's one option. They could change the product to a cheaper product, but in 99.9% of cases that I have spoken to lenders, they do not offer that. They're not obliged to offer it, even though they can. What they will say is, if you get the payments back on track, if the account remains in good standing for a minimum of 12 months, then we may consider putting the person onto a better mortgage product. And this is sad, because there's no incentive on the part of the lender to give people in financial distress their cheapest mortgage, which is bloody ridiculous. But when were banks ever interested in that anyway? And I say they can add arrears to the mortgage. So they can extend the term of the mortgage completely, or they can add arrears to the mortgage. So they have options, but in a lot of cases, they don't choose to exercise any of those. Okay, they may do it, but they don't always do it. So the seller's options, this is what the seller can do. So you can work with a seller and you can say, right, if you're in the process of claiming benefits, the seller may delay action. But you need to prove that the seller is in the process of claiming benefits. But that might only be a short-term option while they work out how they're going to sell the house or whatever else they're going to do. So again, you can still come into this process. If they're actively trying to sell their home to you or through an agent or whatever, they need to prove they're doing that. Again, the seller can show this. They can show they're taking action to get out of the situation they're in. If there is any dispute about the process, so they haven't followed the mortgage conduct of business, or they're in dispute with the FCA, they're in dispute with the ombudsman, then again, that's enough sometimes to slow the process down. And an assisted voluntary sale is where the lender is working with the seller to agree they're going to sell the house. So effectively, the lender and the seller saying, yeah, we're going to get together, we're going to sell this house together. It's not the same as surrendering the house to the lender, but it's a kind of hybrid of that. Now, at the minute, if anybody is in the process at the moment where their finances are in a real mess, and they've applied for what's called a breathing space. So at the minute, there is a special facility at the minute called a breathing space And if someone is in a breathing space or applied for breathing space, it should slow the process down. The problem we have at the minute is so many people post-COVID and coming back out have applied for breathing spaces, that it has made it almost impossible to get a place in breathing space. And all that means is for at least 30 days, and until the companies working with you on the breathing space work out what the situation is, the lenders are not supposed to take any action. The same thing applies if you are receiving medical care or mental health care. So this is why I said mental health care for clients is really important. I'll do a quick one about court, but again, I could talk about these for hours and hours and hours. I don't want to bore the pants out you all. If everybody has the right to have a hearing at court, if they are facing repossession or eviction, so they don't have to wait for the court date. They could ask for an emergency hearing straight away. But on the day of an eviction, even on the day the bailiffs are due to take the house off someone, you can apply in the UK. In England, sorry, you can apply for an emergency hearing. You can apply in Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. The paperwork is slightly different, which is why I can't go into it all tonight. Give me a shout, tell me what you need. But if you have to go to court, or your client has to go to court and you're going to coach them, this is what I say to them every single time. Number one, you speak to the duty solicitor, and you basically get a bit of advice on that morning. Number two, you do not speak to the lender's representative. You allow the judge to make the decision. The lender's representative will put pressure on people at court. They're not supposed to, but they will do. So you don't speak to the lender's representative. If you're with someone and you're going to help them because you're interested in the property, do not speak to the lender's representative, because all you have to do is convince the judge that you have a viable plan in place to either sort the arrears or buy the property. And 9 times out of 10, a judge will find in the favor of the seller. They'll give the sellers time if you know you've got a plan in place. Obviously, so you address the magistrate, you do not address the seller, the lender solicitor. You know, they will say the client has defaulted. They will say the client has £95,000 arrears. They will say the client has come into arrangements with you and breached them, and you will agree with all of that. So you stick to the facts and you stick to the plan. You absolutely allow your client to admit liability, but you present the reasons why the situation has emerged, and more importantly, what the plan is. And you never get fired up. These can be very fraught. They're family courts. No one's being accused of a criminal act, but they're still very fraught because these are emotional hearings. Most people don't want to go to court. Most God-fearing, law-abiding citizens, including investors, don't want to go to court and argue the toss over a property. But where I have gone and argued the toss over a property, I think my success rate at the minute is probably 99%, where we have got more time to do something with the property. The court only has a couple of options, and the same thing applies to Scotland and Northern Ireland. They can adjourn completely, or they can adjourn on specific terms. So we are going to adjourn for the following. You know, we need more information about this. You will bring this information back, and then we'll take another look. They can obviously give an outright possession, which tends to be 28 days, but that's not an eviction. So what they say is, we'll grant a possession order, which gives you still time to fix your shit and agree something with the lenders. Now, the problem is, if they say we will go for an order and you come up with a plan and the plan is agreeable, you are now in a court mandated plan. If you mess that up, then the lender has every reason to go back and get the property, and the court will agree. So if they suspend with a plan agreed, then you must remember to get the client, or you, if you're going to buy the house, make sure that you apply to discharge that plan when it's settled. Because what happens is, sometimes people have a plan with court, the arrears are sorted, and then 12 months down the line, they get themselves organised, and they have 1 month where they miss, and that possession order is still running in the background, and they can immediately go for eviction. So apply to get it dismissed. Advise clients to make sure they get it dismissed if you decide not to buy the house off them, because people overlook it. And I wanted to say this because here's the perception of investors. We're all greedy fat cats who stuff our faces on other people's misery. And I know that is not the case. I know that from my own personal experience, because I ended up being, so low, so fed up, so bereft of options, that I couldn't take it anymore. And I know what it feels like to not only feel suicidal, but to actually want to go and hang. And I attempted to hang myself. So I'm not going to shy away from the fact that we think it's just money, but a lot of people are tied up with the worry about their families, letting their families down, and it becomes so completely overwhelming. But I also know, as someone who came into property having got myself out of the shite that I was in, pardon my French, that I swore if I was ever in a position to help someone who was just like me, that I would move heaven and earth to do it. And by default, I became a repossession specialist. I did not set out to become it. I became it because I was coming across people during the financial crisis who were just like me. And I know there are a million investors out there who genuinely care about what happens. So in terms of your options, we have tools in our toolkit that maybe 10, 15 years ago, people weren't using. Obviously, you can easily buy a property fast. If you've got the capital and you can make it happen, you can very easily buy someone's house off them. And if they are distressed enough where they think, I just don't want the bailiffs coming and taking my house off me and having all my stuff on the driveway, they will often agree to sell at a fast purchase price. But I'm going to say it's usually not a win-win. It's usually a win for the investor, but it's very rarely a win for the person who's selling. And that doesn't always sit well with me. So I'm not saying don't do fast purchases, but if it's a financially distressed seller, it just doesn't sit well with me. A couple of other things that we can do, and these are tools that I learned along the way, and I'm sure you guys have heard about this. In 2010, when I first learned about options and realized that we could do an option on something, I thought, my God, we have found a way to actually do more of this. And of course, this was still when the financial crisis was happening. So assisted sales and options and exchange with delayed completions are my favorite things to do if we know we can give the sellers a better price of the property, but sometimes delay the time over which we actually buy the property. It gives us more flexibility. It gives us a chance to move the sellers out into rented accommodation, because most sellers, when they're in this situation, end up going renting somewhere because their credit is screwed and they're going to need time to get back on their feet. And it gives them a welcome breathing space where they can go and do just that. So assisted sales where the property needs work is one of my favorite. So I use that where it's right. A genuine option agreement where I may have the option to buy it, but I may settle the arrears in the meantime so that I can move people out and rent the property out in the meantime. I have done lots of those. And an exchange where we've exchanged contract and we're going to delay the completion, as long as you have a plan in place to either clear the arrears or pay down the arrears. Again, a lot of lenders are happy with that because they know at some point you're going to buy. So we have the tools in the toolkit, and I just want more investors to realize there's so much more you can do to do the right thing, still make a profit, still buy some properties, still do some deals. And there are people out there waiting for that kind of help right now. So my little vision, without boring the pants out you anymore, I just want to see a space for sellers where they realize that investors are not the enemy. And I've come up with a little idea about the Investors Pledge, where you have some training, you know what it feels like to work with a distressed seller, you commit to also taking care of people's mental health welfare, because we aren't just saving properties when we do this. We aren't just enriching ourselves. We are genuinely saving people's lives. And I have countless examples of people who've said to me, I was going to hang myself, I was going to chuck myself off a bridge if I hadn't sorted this out. And I really want to challenge this greedy investor stereotype. I know so many investors who genuinely do business with a great heart and have been there themselves and understand what it feels like to be in this situation. And one thing I'm doing with investors who are speaking to me about, Trish, how can we do business, is a Beat the Banks Buyers Fund. What I want to do is the guys who want to work with me, even if it's not in training, is that where I'm getting some properties that need someone to come in and front the money, is have some guys that are willing to do that and do it with good heart and good grace. Last couple of bits. This is my contact information. I'll leave this up because I know you're going to record it anyway. You can get hold of me on Facebook. I have a little opt-in if you guys want to get one of my little infographics, but I know Claire's going to record this anyway. You can go and opt into that. And the last bit, I'll just leave this up, getting sellers help. The main ones for UK, and if you email me on my email address that I've just put up, and I'll put it into the chat box in a minute, I will send you, if you're in Scotland, I'll send you the resources for Scotland. If you're in Northern Ireland, I'll send you the resources for Northern Ireland. But for the UK, the main ones are Citizens Advice, obviously. You can check Legal Aid, and then the other ones are National Debt Helpline, Step Change Debt Charity, which are doing a lot with the breathing space arrangement at the minute. Money Advice Service is very good, and Debt Advice Foundation. And the last one, I know I'm rattling through this real quick right now. The last one is at the end of the weekend. You know, we're heading into the weekend now. It's Friday night. For some people, the weekends and the early wee hours in the morning when they're thinking about their finances is when it becomes unbearable. So again, I'm thinking about fellow landlords, fellow investors who have gone through the whole COVID thing and are not going to be able to keep going. It's in the wee small hours of the morning when the family is asleep and you're trying to think your way forward, that the weight of dealing with how do I fix this shit, that's when it hits you. So at the very least, the Samaritans, if you ring 116213 from your mobile, it's straight through to Samaritans. Again, the campaign against living miserably was originally set up for men, but it is now for general support. Give people phone numbers. If you do anything in your business, please have these numbers somewhere in your brochures, in your, on your website. If you are dealing with this distressed and financially distressed sellers and financially distressed landlords, because we aren't just saving properties, we are genuinely in a position where we save lives. That's it.
That was amazing. Thank you. Christy, can you stop the recording?
Yeah, just 2 secs.